Thank you for coming to Shadows of Liberty. My name is Jen Robinson. I'm Director of Legal Advocacy at the Bertha Foundation, and I'm going to be moderating the panel today.
You know, this may be my last time in public, so I thought I should start with a situation where you won't be able to see me anymore. But this mask is to show solidarity with a number of our young supporters who, in protest to economic censorship of WikiLeaks, have been raided by the FBI on a constant basis within the United States and within the UK and within Scotland and within Ireland and in Spain and Latin America. Those people are now facing collectively more than 100 years in prison for protesting online about the economic blockade of WikiLeaks. So we've come to be quite concerned with how freedom of speech is censored in the 21st century. And that's why I agreed to take part in this film.
I thought I might start with Jean-Philippe. If you could explain for us, to get things started, what your inspiration was from the film and how it all came about.
The inspiration for the film mainly was a book written by Ben Begdickian. Ben Begdickian is an American journalist. One of the great things, he's done many great things. One of the great things that he's done was start investigating what was happening in the 1950s in terms of the civil rights movement in the United States before anyone on a national level was reporting on it. And in the early 80s, he wrote a book entitled The New Media Monopoly. The new media monopoly at the time suggested that in the future, in the next few decades, that we would have less and less corporations, private corporations with different business interests that would control our media. He was talking from the point of view of the American media throughout the book, and that's basically what inspired the film. At Dog Factory, this is a media organization that was born in about 5 or 6 years ago. And I guess the mandate was to make documentary films to change the world, to observe social issues that matter to the widest amount of people around the world. So Ben Begdickian's book about the media really seemed to answer to that mandate, and we were inspired by the book.
The most flagrant, well-documented censorship attack on us was by the Bank of America. The Bank of America heard that we had information exposing corruption in the Bank of America. And as a result of that, we put together a crisis team. That crisis team then went to the US Department of Justice, and all this is documented. Went to the US Department of, went to its Washington lawyers, Hunting and William, big, powerful, influential Washington law firm. They then went to the Department of Justice and asked, how can we stop WikiLeaks? The Department of Justice referred them to 3 US intelligence contractors. H.B. Gary, Plantier, and I remember the name of the other one? H.B. Gary, Plantier, and another one I can't recall the name of. Those 3 contractors put together their plan of attack to censor us, to spy on our lawyers, to spy on our journalists, to hack our servers, to conduct a smear campaign, to increase any sort of internal tensions within the organization. Quoted at $2 million per month back to the Bank of America. Now, Anonymous, our supporters, managed to get hold of 78,000 emails from one of these intelligence contractors, and that information was in there, together with similar plans to attack critics of the Department of Commerce. Those have now led to two Senate investigations, to two congressional ethics investigations within the United States, the results of which, as far as I'm aware, have not come before the public. But there is no denial about these documents describing this entire situation were true. All the perspectives, the diagrams, etc., we have published them. The head of the H.B. Gary, one of the 3 intelligence contractors, resigned in disgrace, etc. It's all completely documented. That if you go to expose corruption in a major American corporation, they will hire intelligence contractors to take down your media organization, to take down supportive journalists like Glenn Greenwald. He was listed on the chart of people to be attacked with the statement that when push comes to shove, journalists will choose career over principle. So let's make push come to shove for Glenn Greenwald of Salon magazine.
I think it's a really timely film, but one of the questions I had for you, looking at the examples that you chose, the various examples where media organisations chose not to report a story either because of corporate interest with sponsors or the like, or because of government interests. The most recent example you chose was in relation to the Iraq War. In the course of your research, and I'd like to open this up to the panel too about other examples that you've come across in your work, other more recent examples where the media has chosen not to report a story and why?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the main challenge with making these cinematic films is choosing our stories. I think we had about 30 stories that we researched that we wanted to include in the film, and then we ended up with 6, along with the history that threads throughout the film. I mean, our choice really, it came through, there was a lot of technical reasons why we chose those stories, because, the people we could speak to, they wanted to come and talk to us. A lot of people are afraid to talk about their situation, especially the more recent ones. They have families to support, they have a career they've invested in. So, I mean, there's so many factors that come into choosing our stories. Obviously, I would have liked to have very recent examples that happened last week or last year. One of the, I think, amazing stories that really ties these corporations and their control, not only on the media, but whether it's the military complex or funding sources, is the example that WikiLeaks is going through right now, where these economic organizations that control a lot of what's happening in the world in terms of finance. I'm talking about Visa, I'm talking about MasterCard, I'm talking about PayPal. Now that we have WikiLeaks that run on public funds only, well, they say, well, you're giving your information for free, it's classified, and they have their own reasons why they're not interested in it. But they take out the possibility of using their cards, Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal, to fund to WikiLeaks, and 95% of WikiLeaks' funds have been taken away. So that's a story, that's a very recent one that I would have loved to include in the film.
Can I ask you a more specific question about that? I mean, as editor-in-chief and founder of WikiLeaks, WikiLeaks was set up specifically to be not-for-profit, sourced by public donations in order to fund its activities, which gets away from the problems identified in this film around corporate media ownership. Yeah. Is that the way forward?
Well, it would have been the way forward. I mean, WikiLeaks is a very popular organization around the world. If we look at, say, what happens when we have a big burst of publicity, we were making £120,000 a day in donations worldwide. That's a significant source of revenue to do the sort of work that we do, which led to us saying, well, the solution for funding journalism, it's quite obvious, try doing it for a change. And, when you do it, you get support. We were supported, strongly supported, And that support is still there, but the ability for people to give us that support is no longer there. Why? Because totally outside the rule of law, Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, the Bank of America, money bookers, Western Union, and others, US financial services companies, have blockaded this organization like the United States blockades Cuba or Iran. But at least in the blockade of Cuba or Iran, there is some administrative process. In the blockade against us, there's not even an administrative process. There's no legal process. There's not even an administrative process. So that's how modern day censorship is done. When you really start pushing the envelope, it is under the surface contacts with big financial organizations who just do this as favors to their political masters.
One of the other issues in the film was the way in which the US government gives out propaganda, misinformation, and the way it's so uncritically reported by the press. We spent some time together in Pakistan working on the drones issue. I wonder whether you might talk about contemporary examples that you've found of this sort of information finding its way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jen, for that question. About 8 months ago in late October, we didn't know each other at the time, but Jen and I were both in Pakistan for an event organized by Clive Stafford Smith of Reprieve to meet about 50 people from Waziristan. These are the people, these are relatives of people that were killed by drone strikes. And when we met them, we didn't realize that among them was a young man who would later be killed by a drone strike, Tariq Aziz. I didn't have a fancy camera like a red camera as Jean-Philippe had, but I had a small camera and I filmed him and I met him. And when we had that footage and we showed that, and 3 days later, 3 days after we met him, he was killed in a drone strike. The footage was taken up by ABC World News Tonight. It was shown. And the CIA called ABC News Tonight and said, what evidence do you have this man was not a militant? Now, the Tariq Aziz is 16 years old. And they said, well, do you have any evidence that he was even killed? So we got the footage of his funeral. And 2 weeks after I was in Pakistan, I went to the United States. And I was invited by the Washington Post. I met with the whole team for the Washington Post, 4 people, 2 editors, national security editors, reporters. I met with the New York Times. I told them what I saw. 2 months later, the story came out in late December from the Washington Post, where the Washington Post met with the CIA, and the CIA said, we have absolute conclusive evidence this man was a terrorist, and that's why we killed him. Now, Jen and I met this young boy, who's 16, in person. If he was really a terrorist, would he have come and met us when they could have snatched him off the street? And if they could have taken him off the streets, why didn't they? So it's clear they're lying. And when I talked to the CIA, I called them up and said, how do you know, that this man was a terrorist? They wouldn't talk to me. And when I asked the Washington Post how this happened, the Washington Post said, well, the CIA talked to us. They called us up. They gave us a briefing. I said, well, who? They said, under the rules under which we talk to them, they will not tell us who it is. So they give them information. They bring them into the system. I mean, I can go into many examples of my personal experiences in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and of course in Pakistan. But there is this collusion that is referred to in the film, where the CIA will bring you in. They won't talk to me. I call them up. I send them emails. They will never talk to me. But they will talk to the New York Times, and they will talk to the Washington Post on condition that they report it their way.
That's right. In that particular case, all of the media reports reported that a drone strike had killed suspected militants, or militants, not even saying suspected, without having even checked the facts. So that acceptance without question of CIA reference material. Jean-Philippe, I wonder whether during the course of the other journalists that you interviewed during the film that they had a similar position to Julian.
Well, certainly. I mean, in the film here we have 38 interviews. Most of them are journalists, have a media outlet, an independent media outlet. Whether they started off in the mainstream, for example, Dan Rather, who was with CBS News, the lead anchor there for 30 years, is now on HDTV running his own independent media organization. A lot of these journalists, they have dedicated their lives to their work, which is bringing real information to the people they represent, whether it's in their country and actually for the entire world. And it was absolutely an amazing inspiration for me to meet these people who really dedicate their lives. I mean, you saw how they express themselves and tell their stories, and at the same time they come into confrontation with the mainstream media and try to fight through that. So absolutely, I mean what's important to recognize is that yes, there is the mainstream media, but that there are hundreds and thousands of organizations out there that are independent, bringing us information. A lot of them operate on the internet. They're under threat because they're on the internet. These corporations are trying to knock them out and control it, just like what's happening to WikiLeaks. So it's important to support independent information, to pay attention to where our money goes. Do we want to pay our bills to Sky or actually donate to Democracy Now! and watch their news 5 times a week? So these are decisions that we have to make now, especially with the birth of the internet. It's very new, and us, the people, we have to control it as opposed to the corporations coming in and take control of the internet.
So I certainly have an opinion on the Leveson inquiry, and we made a submission to the Leveson inquiry. First of all, let's just drop this, it's all about News International. Let's be real about what is happening here in the UK. What is happening here in the UK is that there is a foreign adversary media organisation, News International, which was once Australian and moved its headquarters to New York along with Rupert Murdoch's citizenship in order to expand into the United States. It is a foreign media organisation in this country, and that's not necessarily bad. But the local media organisations, which all have their connections into the British establishment, are ganging up to beat the hell out of it. And for valid reasons in many cases, but they don't like to take the flak back in the other direction. And this is not about tabloids at all. The UK media sector, at its highest levels in every single media organisation, is journalistically corrupt. I don't mean necessarily that they're taking great bribes of cash. I mean they are corrupt as journalistic entities, because the primary factor in journalism must always be accuracy. It must be at its very basis to tell the truth, and then if you get beyond that, to be representative with the truth, to tell the representative truth, to give truth from different parts of the society. But we're not anywhere near the representative problem. We haven't even solved the accuracy problem. Journalists, and there's a great statement about what a journalist is. It's a mouse training to become a rat, which is an editor. In the UK, in the UK, when people get into positions of influence, they are invited to sit down at the table of other people who have influence, to exchange favours, to give positive stories on one thing or another, to share information, to trade information. They become political actors. We have to understand that all media organisations that have any ability to influence are sucked into becoming political actors by politically powerful individuals. And that is true here in the UK. And the Leveson inquiry needs to stop acting as if, oh, it's just these bad tabloids, it's News Corporation, it's Mirror and the Express Group and all this riffraff. And actually, in the past month or so, we have seen something a bit better, which is looking at how often Murdoch and his representatives sat down to dinner with politicians or opposition leaders hopeful at coming into politics. But it's not just Murdoch who's doing this, it's everyone who's doing this.
I was just thinking, just on a slightly different note, the Leveson inquiry has actually gotten very little coverage in the United States. And you'd think that because News International owns so much media in the United States, people there would be interested. But there's complete silence. You will not find coverage of, there's one of News International's senior employees, Piers Morgan, now works in the United States. How much coverage is there? Who's asking him questions there? There's complete silence there. Now and then you'll see an article in the New York Times, but in general, the coverage is just completely absent. So you really have to ask the question why it is that mainstream media in the United States is not questioning News Corporation and Fox.
When I started meeting all these journalists, that was a lot of the conversation we'd be having. It's, let's share our stories. Let's repeat our stories. Let's encourage everyone to ask the right questions. I mean, that's part of the problem with the mainstream media. I mean, it's just so dull, and the questions that are asked is just complete rhetoric, really. So that's what this film is here to inspire. Absolutely, it is to notice what's happening, notice the time that we're in, this important time. Like one of our cast members says, this is just as important as the forefathers when Thomas Paine went to the United States and inspired the American Revolution. This is the new century. This is the new model for media, this internet. We've never had a communication device like the internet. It's been offered to us. We can utilize it, but now these very powers that have had power since forever are trying to control that as well. So absolutely, it's asking the right questions all the time and repeating ourselves as well, repeating these stories, spreading the word, supporting each other as citizens. We're seeing it happening everywhere in the world, whether it's Occupy Wall Street or even some of the internet responses to some of these ridiculous USA laws that have been introduced to control more of the internet. So yeah, we just have to come together as a community through the internet, and I think there really is an uprising now, and we have to keep supporting each other. I mean, I mentioned it earlier. I think I'm sitting here with information revolutionaries, yet they're in a state where they can't travel. They have to go to house arrest. These kinds of things. This is an amazing time we're living in. We have to react against this. We have to notice that this is a real time of change.
An interesting prism for regulation across media ownership is actually Sweden. So there is the Murdochs of Sweden, and they are called the Bonnier Group. And the Bonnier Group owns 60-something% of all media in Sweden. And they own over 150 publications and presses around the world. So they're a Murdoch family that no one talks about, been going 200 years. Okay, how did they get to 60-something% of media ownership within Sweden? And they sort of take positions that are similar to Murdoch. You know, they're essentially right-wing, pro-US group. They got that way in part by saying that the Swedish constitution, which protects media, does not permit any regulation of the concentration of media ownership. So the very thing that keeps press free, which is having a competitive market where you have different players, if one won't report something, then the other will, that has been eroded under the basis of the freedom of the press. Because it would be an impingement on the freedom of the press to say that a group could not own all the press. But it's obviously clear that if one company owns all the press, that you do not have freedom of the press. But similarly, if one company owns 60% of the press, you do not have proper freedom of the press. Maybe you can get the truth up in an article or a blog somewhere, but when you're dealing with whole societies, a fact is not important. What is important is how much of that fact is presented to the society. It is like making pumpkin soup with facts. It's how much milk you put in and how much salt you put in and so on. It is not that you have a little speck of truth here. It is how much can be splayed out of the whole population, how much of that truth can penetrate the brains of the entire population and change the way that they think. And when you have one media owner owning such a great proportion of the media output, you can influence the destiny of a society. And that is why when NATO invaded Yugoslavia, what did they go for other than the anti-aircraft systems and the communication systems for the military? Their next target was the TV stations, it was the printing presses, etc. The same is true in every single coup. What do they take? They take the runway and the TV station and the parliament. Media is one of the central controlling pillars of the destiny of a society. And it is not an insubstantial thing. It is one of the fundaments of how our society understands itself. So it can't just be tossed aside to let loose to market forces, which, left to their own devices, as we know from nearly all markets, end up in monopolies.
Well, I think go and report the news on your own. I mean, today, because of the internet, you can actually go and create your own blog. I mean, literally in about 5 minutes, you could set up a blog of your own, start putting news out. Does that mean that everyone will see it? No, but it takes time, but it's possible for you to break the media monopoly. I mean, we don't have to rely on, the News of the World or the Sunday Times. It is possible. I mean, today, particularly with cell phones, people can stream news instantly from where it's happening. Whether it's Occupy or whether it's the hanging of Saddam Hussein. No media company got inside that hanging, but a security guard filmed that, brought it out, and was able to distribute it without the help of the mass media. And I think that is, in fact, our greatest strength today. Because when you have, as Julian said, the media concentrate into a few hands, they're going to work with politicians, and particularly in times of war, work with the military and report a certain kind of news. You have the opportunity to completely break that monopoly. And that's the brilliance of it.
I just wanted to add that part of our project here is not only the film, but it's also an outreach program. We're just in the infancy of starting to show the film. And what we'd like to do on our website is introduce an outreach program that's also connected to many of the organizations from our cast. So then once you see the film, I mean, because one thing that happens is you see the film and it's, what can I do? So we're just in the process of building that now. So you'll be able to go to our website and find out what you can do to get involved in media reform.
Look, the future of the world is the future of the internet. The internet, to channel a friend of mine, Jeremy Zimmerman, is the one global communications tool we have to communicate to each other and to understand each other. It is the one tool that has a hope of being used to address the global problems that we all face. What's happened now with the challenge that the internet has given to existing structures in the world, and actually some rather nasty new ones that have been using the same globalization process to network amongst themselves. The challenge of the internet in providing true information, working around the existing censorship of the mainstream media, is being responded to by, firstly, surveilling the entire damn thing. So understanding what people are going to do, what they're going to say, what the broad sweeps and trends are. And secondly, by censoring it, by balkanizing it. We're in the UK, and the reality is in the UK, you can no longer access the Pirate Bay, for example, and many, many other sites. In Australia, there was an internet censorship blacklist that we fought against. In fact, WikiLeaks was censored. My article on the Australian blacklist was added to the Australian blacklist because it disclosed information about what the contents of the blacklist was, and the blacklist is meant to be black. I mean, the first rule of censorship is that the first thing that will be censored is discussion about how the censorship works in all these different countries. China we can see as probably where the West is heading. I don't know how many of you remembered the London riots and David Cameron's response just a few days later in Parliament. So what we have to do, I have instructed the UK police and intelligence services to work out how to spy on and shut down social media. Coming just a few months after Mubarak in Egypt said exactly the same thing. So we are faced with networks of powerful groups. It is wrong to call them states because they're not states anymore. They're international networks of military contractors and intelligence organizations and Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, etc. Networks of powerful groups who are trying to shut down our ability as a human civilization, not just as individuals, as a human civilization, in understanding how they are acting at odds with the necessities of human civilization.
And with that, I think we're going to have to wrap up. If there's one thing that I think we can take away from today is to support the film and to support new and independent media. But I'd like you to join me in thanking our panellists, Jean-Philippe Tremblay.
Thank you for coming.
Pratap Chatterjee and Julian Assange.
Thank you, Jen.